Hello everybody, how are you? Thank you very much for joining us for another FTMA webinar. This webinar is on chain of custody for fabricators, and we've got Engineered Wood Products Association of Australasia, Dave Gover is going to present for us. So we have had webinars coming up in the future. We've got Understanding the Sawn Timber Market next week from Tim Woods. FTMA did a 2020 fabricator survey that we sent out a week or two ago, and some of the information from that survey will be used, and Tim will show how easily collated information gets put into reports. And then we've got Is Your Timber Fit for Purpose with Andy McNaught, who's one of Dave's team members. And between the 4th of November and 9th of December, we've got the FTMA 6 Weeks of Christmas. So if you want to listen to our sponsors, listen to fabricators from every state and territory on the 4th of November, talking about the markets, how they've handled COVID, and hear from our amazing sponsors who help us keep delivering information and services to our members. We have things like $500 Four Pillars gin pack, pretty good gift in my opinion. We have a $500 JB Hi-Fi gift where you can buy all your Christmas presents or buy something for yourself. So the more information will come out to members shortly on that. Catch up on our past webinars. They're all loaded up onto our website. We had the timber treatment compliance one with the entertaining Jack Norton last week, and people can go and view those on our YouTube channel via the FTMA Australia website. But today we do have Dave Gover speaking. The chain of custody program is something I personally have been interested in for our industry for a long time. For me, the concerns has always been around the fact that fabricators use so many, different timber suppliers. So once you open a pack of timber, it's hard to keep track, and sometimes some of your jobs will go out with 2 or 3 timber companies' product in it. But Dave's going to talk about how we can incorporate that and the importance of the chain of custody, because ultimately, if you go for corporate jobs or government jobs, they will want to see that you actually have these sort of credentials in place. So I'll stop sharing my screen, Dave, and if you could share yours, that would be great. And welcome along. And you're on mute, Dave.
Thanks, Kirsten. And I will get to sharing my screen in a minute, but I guess probably before I do that, I'm going to start off just by acknowledging country. So I'm on Yagara Terrible land, and up here we say Wanya. That's my new learning for this year. That's the local term for g'day. And acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge my Indigenous friends and my industry colleagues on whose country our trees grow and on whose country our operations are based. What I get you to do is, normally when I present, I move, I walk, I roam, I love to see people reacting. So what I'm going to get you to do is just type in the chat function where you're from. So I know who's here, say g'day, and I then feel like I'm not boring the crap out of you. So if you want to do that, I'll work out how to share my screen and we'll get into it. And if you don't type anything, I'm going to think I'm boring you. Here we go. Oh, now, every time you do something in Zoom, it changes everything on your screen. Can you see what you're meant to be seeing? Kirsten?
Yes, we do. Sorry, I had to mute. I'm answering to you. Excellent. Yeah, it looks good, Dave.
Okay, cool. Righto, I can no longer see the chat screen, so don't worry about it. I'm just going to have to pretend that I can see you and get the feedback. So look, I guess in terms of the EWPAA, we are a member-based association. We pride ourselves on our technical expertise. And the main programs that we're involved in are development of product standards. So that's particle board, plywood, LVL, MDF, sawn timber, glulam, and also the applications of those products. We then take that and we run a product certification program. So our manufacturing members have us in their mills twice a year, going through their manufacturing process, looking at their test results, but also we take samples and independently test them as a way of attesting that they conform to various product standards. In our certification program, we also run chain of custody certification, and we run some research and development. And I've been steering the EWPAA for the last 5 years. Chain of custody is something that Kirsten and I have spoken about on a few occasions. It's probably been a bit of a slow burn, but I think it's a good time to be thinking about chain of custody, not so much just from a sustainability point of view, but from a regulatory point of view as well. In terms of disclosure, what I will say is, whilst I've been here 5 years, I'm only going to be here for another 3 months. So I'm actually moving on from this role, and I'll be joining AKD in 2021. So I'm just putting it out there in terms of disclosure. So if I do say things that are about AKD, then that better be why, but I'll try and be unbiased. So in terms of what we're going to run through, I just want to run through pretty much 4 things. So chain of custody, what it is, where it's used, why it's important, and how it works. So hopefully at the end of this, you've got a bit of an idea of why it might be something that you want to pursue, and you'll have some ideas about what might be involved. So in terms of what it is, if you look up chain of custody on Wikipedia, Wikipedia being the source of all good things, it describes chain of custody as an often tedious process. So that's not a great starting point. But in the activity that we do, we're involved with over 50 businesses that have chain of custody certification. And we see the whole spectrum. And some people make it incredibly complicated and incredibly tedious, and other people just do it well, get on with it, and it just fits in with their operation, and you'd hardly know that there's anything different being done. So it can be a tedious process, but it doesn't have to be. What it's really about is looking at how materials are being handled and transformed, and being able to trace those materials back to a defined source or defined sources. And if it's done well, it's a piece of cake. The other aspect of it is that in terms of chain of custody, it's good business risk management, and there's a whole lot of reasons it's good business risk management, which we'll come to. So in terms of where it's used really anywhere where there's a need to link the source and the sources. And one of the key areas that we've seen in the forest products industry is sustainable forest management. So there's 3 logos there. The first one is Responsible Wood, which is an Australian chain of custody and forest management mark. PEFC, which is the International Program for Endorsement of Forest Certification, and Forest Stewardship Council. So they all run chain of custody programs that trace wood products back to a sustainably managed source. And a number of you may see those logos coming in on the packs of timber that you're buying at the moment. It's also used in deliveries and invoicing. No one really thinks of that as chain of custody, but if you're passing material from one business to another, you want to know that your material got there, and you have things like delivery notes or com notes or whatever, and you want to know that when you're paying an invoice, you've actually received the material that you were asking for. So that's probably the oldest version of chain of custody around. And you're all using it. It's also used in drug testing and pathology. So if some of you guys are running drug testing programs in your businesses, your providers will have a chain of custody process they've got to follow. Chemical and environmental sampling, and it's used in criminology. Hopefully no one's using it in criminology in their businesses. If you are, I'm not the right person to talk to. That's a different sort of chain of custody. So yeah, if I summarize all of that, anywhere that a downstream user needs or wants confidence that the material attributes can be linked to the source attributes. So it's about confidence, it's about the material, and it's about linking it to the source. So that's pretty much chain of custody, what it is in a nutshell. So we get into why is it important? And this is a bit philosophical, but I used to live in the country, and I love living in the country because I grew up in the country, and I've worked in cities, and I've worked in the country. And country towns have what I call the village, where if you upset someone in the village, if you upset the wrong person in the village, you probably want to start looking for somewhere else to live. If you're running a business in a village and you don't have a good reputation, you don't have business. And that's how sometimes we operate, and sometimes that works. But increasingly we're getting into a global market, and we're getting into much more complicated supply chains. So this is what it used to look like, I reckon, when if I was a building owner or wanted to build a house, I'd walk down the mud track, I'd go and knock on the door of the local builder and say, this is what I need. The builder would go and find their trusted local miller and get the timber that they needed, and it would all be hunky-dory, no problem. It's based on trust. Jump forward a few thousand years, this is what it looks like today. So we've got a building owner, they have a building certifier that is hopefully acting in the public interest to make sure that the building's being built properly, and they're asking questions of the builder, who's being supplied by a frame and truss fabricator, who's getting their timber off a distributor, possibly, who's getting it somewhere back through the supply chain from a mill. So we go from this really simple relationship, completely relationship-based structure, to a much, much more complicated supply chain that has much more complicated relationships, less personal attachment, and therefore can't have the same level of trust. And then you add in the fact that we're in a global marketplace, it adds another complexity again. Hopefully that makes sense. So you got high trust, low regulation on the one hand, and low trust, high regulation on the other. That's a relative scale. So that doesn't mean that in the current market we don't have trust. It just means that it's harder to build the trust across the entire decision making and supply chain. And as a result of that, we end up with regulation or pseudo regulation. And these are a few areas that I see that chain of custody is going to become more important. So the Green Building Council, currently they have chain of custody credits in their Green Star scheme. That's mostly for commercial buildings. They're currently in the process of consulting on Green Star homes. The initial rollout of that probably won't have chain of custody in it, but it is likely, quite foreseeable, that at some stage the Green Building Council and their Green Star Homes scheme would put in some sort of sustainable sourcing criteria. Living Building Challenge is similar. Don't know whether people have come across that. Builders Declare. Builders Declare is a group, informal group of builders across Australia who have signalled their concerns about where we're going in terms of climate change and climate management. And straight after this, I'm jumping on a seminar where they're going to be talking about exactly that. They're talking about how do you as a builder know that the wood that you're getting is from sustainable and responsible sources. Architects Declare is the same thing. We've got the Australian Procurement Council. So they've got a whole lot of stuff around supplying to government jobs. And governments are increasingly writing in not just price-based clauses, but other clauses around fitness for purpose, around sustainability, and around social outcomes. There's a chain of responsibility legislation. So that's particularly in Queensland. New South Wales is working on something. Other states will implement something at some stage, but the chain of responsibility legislation is being about whoever you are in the supply chain, you've got to be able to say to your downstream customers that this wood is fit for purpose, fit for these uses, and shouldn't be used with these limitations on it. So preservative treatment timber, you had Jack speaking last week. How do you know if you're putting treated timber into a frame? How do you know, or how does your builder know, and how does the building certifier know? How are they confident that that material has been H2 treated, H2S treated? How do they know that it actually complies with the standards that it's claiming compliance to in terms of its structural integrity? And the last one there, social procurement. That's going to be something that I think is going to end up in more and more procurement contracts, probably in the next 5 to 10 years. If you weren't on last week, 2 weeks ago, talking about domestic violence, or you weren't hooked into the mental health stuff, that's all stuff that's going to start flowing through into procurement. And having the chain of custody to be able to link the businesses who are delivering social outcomes linking them to the products that are being used on jobs. Okay, how are we going? Have we got any questions up yet, Kirsten?
No questions as yet.
So everyone's happy for me to keep going.
Yep.
Okay, so.
Oh, Dave, could you just mention then about the Jack's comment and the treatment?
Yep.
Is Engineered Wood Products looking at doing some sort of certification down the path? Like, how do we get certification of the treatment area?
We are. So we'll digress a little bit for a minute. Yeah, so we are looking at certification of preservative treatment. It's an area that has been of interest for a long time, but has been held up by a standard which really needed some serious work. That standard is somewhere in the later stages of being published at the moment, and I'm hoping that we'll see it early 2021. When that happens, the EWPAA will be in a position to start providing certification.
Thanks.
No worries. Okay, so chain of custody, how does it work? So I said at the start, you can make it really, really complicated and you make it tedious to administer, or you can make it simple and you can integrate it into your business. And there's pretty much 4 key elements to it. So working out your suppliers, working out your materials handling, putting some management oversight over the top of it, and some communication. The big part of it is how you work out the credentials of your suppliers. So we'll work through these. So in terms of the materials that you're using, the first question to ask is, what is it that I'm receiving? So is it MGP? If so, who's it from? What grades are we getting? Whose LVL are we getting? Whose plywood are we getting? Whose particle board are we getting? Thinking through who are our suppliers going to be? So that's pretty straightforward. I think businesses do that anyway. What information are they giving me, and how confident should I be in that information? So is that supplier giving me certification to go with the products? Are they giving me a bunch of test reports? Are they someone that I entrust implicitly and I can convince everyone down the supply chain to trust implicitly and I'm just relying on a handshake? Or is that a nod and a wink? Is it a great price and that's all I'm worried about? Or is it something different every time I go and talk to them? So all of those things are going to shape your confidence in that relationship. And the last part of it there is how does my forklift driver know what's okay? Because it's fine for me, if I'm managing an operation, it's fine for me sitting in an office somewhere saying, yep, we know what comes into our business, but what have we done to actually make sure that the forklift driver knows? And our supplier, the Dodgy Brothers supplier, isn't substituting something on the way into our business. So that's the material stuff. So that's pretty high level. Then you get into this due diligence process. And due diligence, you probably need to start looking at, I think, from a technical perspective. So if we were just talking about sustainability, you look at it from a supplier perspective. But I think from a technical fitness for purpose, you'd need to look at it on a per product basis. So you pretty much want to know what's the pedigree of the product. And the way you do that is through a risk assessment process, and every business should be running some sort of risk assessment process, whether you've documented it or whether you're just doing it intuitively. There will be some sort of risk assessment process in your business. And from a technical perspective, product fitness for purpose, there's a bunch of things that we think are good indicators of low risk. Is your supplier a legitimate business? Is there certification, or do they have legitimate, competent, independent, and verifiable certification? So has someone else looked at their business, someone with the right technical skills, looked at their business, looked at their operation and said, yep, we are confident that these guys make a product that meets the claims that they're talking about. So that's one way of determining a low risk supply. Another way might be looking at other trustworthy evidence of performance. So have they had material tested? Can they produce test reports? I'm not keen on test reports on their own because they give you a snapshot in time, but they're certainly better than nothing. Do they actually understand their products? Do they understand what performance means? Is their branding consistent and is it complete? And that's something that Andy will talk to you about in a couple of weeks' time around incomplete branding. And another one there, are they an invested supplier? You look at the corollary of that, some high-risk suppliers. So are they an invested supplier or are they a fly-by-night pop-up container trader that's jumped on one of the various online marketing things where you can buy wood products by the container and get them down here in 3 or 4 weeks, have no trading premises but start marketing on Facebook or whatever, and basically you're taking an opportunistic approach to the market and might not know anything about it. People might think I'm exaggerating when I say that, but we have phone calls from all sorts of people wanting to become plywood importers, including a bike shop that thought it was a good idea because they could see all this form ply on a building site without knowing anything about the product. They just saw it as an opportunity. Some other things there. So supply chain that includes participants who are in areas where there's a high corruption perception index. So there is an independent organisation that publishes on an annual basis a corruption perception index, and if there's countries that have a high corruption perception index, actually it's a low corruption perception index because high is good and low is bad, then that's an indicator that you need to take some more care in working out what's going in your supply chain, and you shouldn't just take people's word for it. The inconsistent or incomplete branding or incomplete provision of information, that's a problem where it indicates that people don't understand what the product is. If they haven't actually taken the time to understand the branding and information requirements that are in standards, there's every chance that they don't understand some of the more technical and more important in terms of performance requirements of the standard. Look at their history and their reputation. The last point there is whether or not there's any substantiated independent concerns. So that's not competitor A's got the shits with competitor B, so they start flinging mud around in the market. That's about an independent body saying, yeah, actually, we've had a look at this material and on the basis of our investigation, these are the concerns that we have. So you can work out whether your materials are going to be low risk or high risk. Now, if they're high risk, that doesn't mean you can't use them. It's not the role of chain of custody to tell people how to run their business. Businesses make their own risk decisions, but what chain of custody will do is say, how are you going to manage that risk? And there's two ways or two parts of risk management we'll typically look at. So one of them is what's the supply chain? What risks exist in the supply chain? So if you've got a supplier who has, the supplier that is selling directly to you, if you go to them and ask them what due diligence have they taken to make sure that the material that they're receiving and distributing is fit for purpose, and they can present to you, yep, this is the process that we've been through, and you're confident that process is robust, then that's about risk management. If you go to your supplier and say, how do you know this stuff's fit for purpose, and they say, oh, don't worry about it, that's not a great sign that risk is being managed. So it's about working back through the supply chain to work out at what point can you get to someone who trusts you. Now that has commercial implications because your suppliers don't necessarily want to tell you where they're getting the material from. And if they don't want to tell you that, that's fine. I think the pushback is that if you don't want to tell us, you do the due diligence to our satisfaction. That saves you doing it. So do the due diligence to our satisfaction or we'll go somewhere else. And the other point that's there is whether or not their supply chain is secure. If it's not secure, then you run the risk of having different materials from different sources being injected into your business without you being asked, as they go to different suppliers, because something in the supply chain is breaking down and they don't have the material that you thought that you were getting available at that time. So this is the supply chain side. The other side is the manufacturer side. So having a look at what are the quality processes that the manufacturer's got. Again, as the corruption perception index comes into this, if you've got a business which is operating in an area that's known to have concerns about product quality, then you need to have a much more robust approach to your risk management. Ask them whether or not they've got product and professional indemnity insurance. Ask them to show you what their policy is. And that's something that, in terms of certification, if someone has accredited certification, they have to have product and professional indemnity insurance. If they don't have the certification, it's something that you should include in your risk management process. And the final point there is that it's a good idea in terms of managing risk, and becomes a better idea the bigger the risk is, to commission either someone in your business or someone who can act on your behalf to do an audit of the manufacturing operation to satisfy yourselves that the material that's coming out is actually going to conform, not just today, but tomorrow, the next day, and next month, and through to the end of the year or whenever. But finding a competent person to do that's really important. So that's part of the risk management process. So yeah, we don't say you can't use it. We say if you're going to use it, this is what you need to do. Okay, so that's your due diligence, risk management. Materials handling, this is the boots on the ground bit. You can make this as difficult as you like. I reckon you just make it simple because you don't want to confuse people. But it's really about someone in your business, probably a forklift driver, just verifying that when material turns up on site, is it a material which is on an approved materials list, or has something been substituted? Most of the time it's not going to be a problem, but you just want people to be aware that that there is an expectation of what's going to be received, and the sooner you know about it, the better it's going to be for your business if there's someone sending you the wrong stuff. Maintaining material identification through your business. So Kirsten mentioned at the start, you start getting into challenges when you get into broken packs. That's not necessarily an issue, depending on how you want to communicate to the market in terms of what level of what mix of attributes are coming with that product. So if you've got a bunch of certified MGP10 suppliers, and you've got broken packs of MGP10 and multiple packs end up going into the same job, that's not necessarily an issue, because you can say at the end of that, well, yeah, this job has MGP certified material in it, certified MGP10. You don't need to say anything about who the supplier is. It's just, yep, we're confident that the material is what it is. And keeping records of what products, what suppliers, or what packs go into what jobs, and how much detail you want to go into is going to depend on how many suppliers you're potentially mixing up, how different the attributes are from those suppliers, and how specific you want to make the claim. So if I give you some examples of that in terms of how you communicate to the market, key thing to communicate to the market is tell the truth. So when you go out and make a claim that you can actually defend, and have someone who's auditing you defend it with you. So here's some, I've got to put my bias up here for EWPAA members and Australasian manufacturers. So you might want to go out to the market and be able to say all the wood in these frames is MGP 12, and it's independently certified by the EWPAA to ASNZS, whatever the standard number is for NGP12. And that might be from 2 or 3 different suppliers, but if they're all certified to the EWPAA to that standard, it doesn't actually matter whether there's multiple suppliers that have gone into the same job, as long as they meet that the wording of that claim. Or as an alternative, it might be that you know, there's a Buy Australian Made campaign going on at the moment. I mean, I know a lot of frame and truss manufacturers have got behind that. So you might word it that all of the wood in the frames is manufactured by I've said Australasian because I've got New Zealand members, by Australian manufacturers, and it conforms to ASNZS, whatever. So, you know, as long as the material that's in that job is manufactured by Australian manufacturers who have made a commitment to conforming to that standard, and if they're not certified, you've done due diligence, then that would be fine. A couple of looser options. So just saying that the material is independently certified to an Australian New Zealand standard, who it's certified by is not stated, so it could be anyone. Or it might just be that you're saying that all the frames are traceable to suppliers that conform to Australian standards. And if they're not certified, again, you've been through a robust due diligence process. So that's how you communicate it to the market. And then the last part is making sure you manage the process. So chain of custody, I talked earlier about the village versus the global market. What certification is or should be is a way that people across a complex supply chain can gain trust by virtue of there being an independent umpire who's looking across the total supply chain. So to be able to do that, it's got to be a process that is well managed. So I've said intelligent outcomes are a result of intelligent design and intelligent administration. I'm sure that's a quote from somewhere. I'm not sure where it's from. I just made that up, but I'm sure I'm paraphrasing someone because someone must have said that already. But it's about define the responsibilities of your system, document your process, train the people, maintain records, establish your internal controls, and register and respond to incidents. If you do all of those things, then EWPAA as a certification body or another certification body can come and audit your process and say to the supply chain, this is a robust process, then therefore you can trust that building certifier, you can trust that the building frames that have gone into this job have come from material that's fit for purpose. And the building certifier then doesn't, come along and say, prove to me that this is MGP10 and prove to me that it conforms to Australian standards, which has been something which I understand has happened on building jobs. So there you go. In summary, 4 points. We're moving to from a world of trust to a world of regulation, and that seems to be accelerating at the moment. Probably accelerating at the moment because there have been a number of issues in the construction industry resulting from poor practices, not necessarily in the timber industry, but Mascot, Lacrosse, Opal Towers. There is a focus on conformity in the building industry. So in response to that, know your materials, know your supply chains, do due diligence, manage risks, promote the outcome. And I guess if there's interest across the industry in doing something on an broad industry approach on this, then talk to Kirsten, and Kirsten will talk to me, or she'll talk to my successor, and see what we can put together in terms of an industry program. So that's me talking enough. We'll jump to the questions.
Yep, we've got one here saying, given it's from Anonymous, given it's a tedious task, do you believe you could charge more if you have a chain of custody program in place? What's its value?
Yep. So first thing I'll say to that, it's not necessarily a tedious task. It's only a tedious task if you do a really crap job of setting it up. Once it's set up, if you set it up well, it's actually really low maintenance. Could you charge more? I don't know. I think that's a question that's going to remain to be seen. I think in terms of the value comes from being able to respond immediately to a building certifier who is asking questions about conformity of building frames. So building certifier is going to say to the builder, yep, you put up these timber frames, great. Yeah, they look like they conform to the framing code. Hang on a minute. This stud doesn't have, the one stud that's on the building side that he just happens to look at doesn't have the branding that says it's whatever. I'm now not convinced that this job is made with timber that conforms. If you've got a chain of custody process, you can immediately just say you can present to the builder when you deliver the material. Here's a certificate that says this material conforms with AS/NZS 4357 for LVL, 2269 for plywood, whatever for timber. So that is immediately dealt with as a problem, and Kirsten probably knows more about some of those cases than what I do. But there has been pushback from building certifiers. So that's one place that it can create some value. The other areas where it'll create value is that government jobs, I think, probably going to be starting to ask more and more for sustainability credentials. Now, frame and truss, you're not doing the big commercial jobs, but if we're starting to get into social housing, which is an area where there's a lot of lobbying going on at the moment, that comes with government funding, and it will come with conditions on sustainability. And certainly the Community Housing Industry Association is talking very, very closely with organisations like the Green Building Council. So there will be overlap between them. Does that answer that question?
Yep. And then we've got one which I think is a bit of a long bit of string. How expensive is it to go through the process of getting certification?
Yeah, it is a long bit of string. Well, it can be a short bit of string. If you stand back from it and spend a bit of time understanding what it's got to do, what you need to put in place, it can be done relatively easily. If you go and find a consultant and say, this is what I need, then the string will get longer. That's been my experience. Not only does the string get longer, but it becomes more and more difficult to actually audit because they make it more complicated than it needs to be. So I think in terms of setting it up, if you find some good templates, and a number of your suppliers would probably have some chain of custody templates from a sustainability point of view, and they would probably be happy to share them with you. So there's potential help there. In terms of the certification process, so currently we charge an annual fee for certification to AS 4707 chain of custody for responsible sourcing. We charge an annual fee of $2,000 plus our travel costs and time. I would see that if this was something that had some industry mileage, I would see that we'd try and set something up where we've got clusters, and we would try to get to multiple businesses in the same location at the same time to keep those costs down. And the other thing that can be worked out is running group schemes where you have multiple businesses running the same system with a central administrator. So one of those businesses might act as the administrator, and the other businesses run to exactly the same system. They're following the process, but they don't have to manage, or they don't have to control and maintain the process. So it's a way of making it cheaper. So look, short answer to the question, once it's set up, it's the cost at the moment is $2,000 plus time and travel, but but if there's industry demand for that, then we'd find ways of making that cheaper.
Yep, fantastic. I don't think that's dear. Is there any other questions from people? No, and Dave, so most of the Australian, like most of the timber suppliers within our sector would have that certification and already done?
It's really mixed. So some of it comes down to demand, and I guess it's a question of what the chain of custody means. So chain of custody at the moment means, if I say chain of custody to someone in the wood processing industry, it immediately goes to chain of custody to link the wood that we're processing to a sustainable forest source, and that fits with where they are in the supply chain, and it fits with where historically the pressure's been. I think that when we start talking about chain of custody through the fabrication industry and to the building site, sustainability might be part of that, and Builders Declare certainly would indicate that. But I think there's this other element around chain of custody being about fitness for purpose. So not just about sustainability, but being able to say that to your customers, I buy product off people that I'm absolutely confident are providing me with fit for purpose product. I'm transforming it into another form, being a frame or a truss, and I'm passing it on to you so that you can, I've got chain of custody certification so that you can have absolute confidence that what you're getting is being supplied from a fit for purpose manufacturer.
Yep.
So, look, there's probably, in terms of the sawn timber industry, it's probably about 60% would have, 60 to 70% would have chain of custody certification at the moment. And it's probably about 60 to 70% would have independent product certification to product standards.
Yep. And when it comes to, so there's a lot of fabricators that would, not a lot, but there are some fabricators that actually buy blonde timber and then send it off to get treated rather than buying treated product straight up. That then puts another spanner in the works, I would guess.
Not necessarily. Different attributes. So if they're buying blonde timber, then in terms of a chain of custody process, there'll be a due diligence process about making sure that structurally the timber's okay. If they then want to go and get it treated, then there's another attribute around preservative penetration retention. So that then that's another aspect that gets looked at. Doesn't mean you can't put it under the same the same chain of custody structure. It just means it's another thing that you've got to do due diligence on.
Yeah, but the benefits, I think, in New South Wales, we wrote about it in the last edition of FTMA News, like last month, about LVL, and Andy provided the article. We had some LVL on the market in. Yep. Not from any of the FTMA timber sponsors. So this would actually address that. So if you had a chain of custody program, then instead of buying timber, people go, gee, it's a great price. There's a reason it's not a good price if that's the case.
Yeah. I see your comment in chat there at the moment. So you've asked if you use a product from an FTMA timber sponsor or supplier, can you be sure they have certified products? My only answer to that is that I can't be sure because we're not certifying a number of them, and some of them are overseas suppliers and some of them are domestic suppliers. So I think I can put my hand on my heart and say with absolute confidence that the businesses that EWPAA certifies, I'm confident that that the products that you're getting from them have been through a really robust process. And look, not perfect all the time. I'll admit that it's things happen. But based on testing that we've done, we've tested plywood products where our members' products sourced from the market have been 98.5% compliant. materials that are not certified by EWPAA have been around about 65% compliant. Some of them were certified by other organisations. Yeah, so it's about where do you satisfy yourself, or how do you satisfy yourself that you can trust the materials that you're getting?
And I think the only way people can be assured themselves is do yourself an exercise after today. Talk to your timber suppliers, find out from them what ask them to send through their certification and their documentation, and talk to them. It's really important that you do know. And I've always used the, I think one of the things lacking in the frame and truss industry is the understanding of timber. We know the different grades, of course, but I think that a better understanding of the timber properties is something that I think that could really go down well in our sector. And so for you to talk to your timber supplier and find out exactly from them what their certification process is, I think that will go a long way for you as a fabricator to know that you're using the right product. Have we got any other questions? No? Otherwise, Dave, thank you very much. I think it is an interesting topic. It's something that as we do move forward and as you pointed out, Builders Declare, for example, as there are more groups that come out and do talk about what they expect, then it does help our sector. And yeah, it's not everybody doing commercial or doing government jobs, but I do believe, and FTMA definitely has been pushing for the NDIS housing or the social housing to be increased, and it's an area which is, of course, mostly detached homes and units in those areas. So I think that there's some good areas for good benefits for our fabricators if they do go down this path, and we'll definitely explore it, because I think if we do it, the best way to do it is do it as an industry, because I think that as an industry we need to push for best industry practice. And even though there's some things in the standards that people go, for example, marking of timber, they say, well, it's only a recommendation or one of 3 choices to stamp every 1200. I think it's industry best practice to stamp every 1200, so we should be doing it. So I think that as fabricators, the control's up to you. So please talk to your timber suppliers, and if you've got any questions, let me know, and I can put you in touch with Dave and his team. And we truly thank you for explaining that today, Dave, and hope we can progress this with our sector a little bit more.
No problem. Thanks, Kirsten, and thanks everyone for listening. For those who are in Victoria, keep hanging in there.
It's hard. We tune into Dan, as I said, it's like Stockholm syndrome, and every time we walk away very dissatisfied. So yeah. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we will make a copy of this available. Dave, could I have a copy of your PowerPoint to share with me?
Yep.
Fantastic. Thanks everyone, and have a good day. Bye.
See ya.